Imagine this. Your child has a seizure at school and you feel helpless because you're not there. That's the reality for many parents raising children with special needs. Today, we'll hear Danielle's story and the challenges she's faced advocating for her daughter. Welcome to the Water Prairie Chronicles, a podcast created for special needs parents and those who want to support them. I'm your host, Tonya Wallum, and I'm glad you're here. Today's episode focuses on some of the unique challenges and triumphs of raising a child with special needs. My guest is Danielle Ross, a life coach and a single mom to a young daughter with epilepsy and auditory processing difficulties. During the interview, you'll hear some of the challenges Danielle has faced, and many of you may relate to her frustration. If you have information you can share or want to offer support for Danielle, please leave a comment so others can be encouraged too.
Yeah, that's my hope for so many families, that they just have children that will outgrow it. I've been told by one, because we've had multiple pediatric neurologists, one had said, oh, she might outgrow it. And then the next one said, no, she's not going to outgrow this. This is for the rest of her life. And I'm just like, it's not what I want to hear. It's conflicting. And then the other one is just like, oh, just stay on this medicine and wait 2 years and then come back and see me. So, what do you do?
So wait 2 years, so there's no checkups during that time or changes?
No, I've had to fight. We moved to another state and just trying to find a pediatric neurologist, which was a journey in itself. End up finding one, and he's very thorough. We had 2-hour-long appointments. And, I told him, I'm like, okay, my daughter has this. And he's like, oh, no, that's not this. And he was just very kind of condescending, because I asked him a question. He's like, oh, is that what you wanted to hear? And I'm like, well, as a doctor, that's not what you say to a parent that is just trying to figure out what to do next. I'm like, you don't say, is that what you wanted to hear? It's kind of, it's upsetting. But at least he was thorough and left very thorough notes. So, end up getting somewhere, my daughter being on the medication, and then he ended up retiring and then not really taking my calls, as my daughter had a medical emergency recently and we were in the emergency room. And I'm like, this is kind of life threatening. It's, safety or risk concerns. And his office wouldn't call me back. So then end up finding a new pediatric neurologist. But in this, I have to call their office 6 to 8 times just to get through. So like when you schedule an appointment, it just sends you to a voicemail and no one calls back. And so I'm just at this kind of point of frustration. I don't have a lot of options. In my area, there's really no pediatric neurologist. So the new person is good. And, determining that the medicine my daughter was on for a couple months, she was having adverse effects. They were causing hallucinations. And in that, do the hallucinations not only now have a pediatric neurologist, a child psychiatrist that wanted to put her on antipsychotics. And I'm like, she's 6 years old. I'm not putting my 6-year-old on antipsychotics. And yet still trying to figure out what's reality and what's not reality, and trying to tell her, okay, when you hear this, when you see this, this isn't real and this is what we can do. Trying to figure out how to tell the school, because if you say, hey, my daughter sees this and hears this, they kind of look at you, of course, but having to kind of figure that out. And then her being 6 and just trying to make sense of it. And of course, it's scary for her. It's scary for me, because when it happened, it was like midnight when we had her first episode, and rushing her to the emergency room. And they said, we don't really know what to do. And then they're like, oh, just Google, the specialist. And I'm like, that doesn't help me at 3 a.m. And so I'm just trying to figure out, what do I want to do moving forward in the midst of all of it. So that's me in a nutshell.
A lot of our families that are listening are facing that same series of questions. You you're starting out trying to find who is the doctor, and in your case, you've had to find multiple doctors. Unfortunately, that's such a specialty area. There aren't going to be a lot of choices in each region as well. But then, even when you find the doctor, what questions do you need to be asking? You know, the medicine is one question, but then the side effects from the medicine. And I'm with you, adding more medicine to medicine because of the medicine for a 6-year-old especially, that's a lot. Are there dietary changes that could be there that might do what the medicine's doing? I don't know these answers. I'm not those that are listening, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just asking questions, because these are what the questions are that we keep asking and having to find out, how can we go? I would say, if you're listening and you're a parent of an older child and you have any advice for us, leave it in the comments, send us an email. We will pass this on for others to be able to see as well. The stage that you're in, you're still seeking, but we have parents that are gonna be younger than you that will be able to benefit from this conversation too, to know that, all right, so if I have to change doctors, it's okay. That's something I didn't know. I don't know about you, but I thought that, you have a doctor, you have to stay with that doctor. I had to learn that it was okay to question them and to, I guess you call it, fire them and go on to another doctor if you're not connecting right or if you don't feel like it's the right care for your child.
Exactly, and as you mentioned too, having to sometimes pay out of pocket. So my daughter has insurance, but the insurance has been really difficult. They're referring her to for one, they're referring her to, like, specialists that don't see children. So it doesn't help me when you give me a referral, and this is my 3rd time, and you're not helping me, you know? So in that now I'm doing things out of pocket, so knowing, like, I know that my daughter has trouble with auditory processing. No one seems to really understand or believe me, but it's just comprehending things. I know the medicine already impacts her memory. So I know that, but it's just kind of comprehending things, dealing with, I said dyscalculia, with numbers, just spelling. I said, let's spell moon. And she says MLLN. There's no L in moon, but she hears it. And I said, well, let's spell book, BGG, and then K. There's no G in book. So something is not, working. And so I actually paid $100 out of pocket to take her to an audiologist, and the audiologist, I'm like, this person's supposed to help. And she just gave her a hearing test. She's like, oh, her hearing is good. Well, I understand her. She can hear, but it's something with the processing. So now I'm actually in the process of traveling out of state to find a pediatric audiologist that I found that just works with children. It's where family is, but having to literally leave the state, probably pay a couple $100 out of pocket just to get some more answers.
Right. And we haven't traveled that far, but we have traveled at times, and my daughter still travels to see, her low vision specialist because it's someone that she connects with well. She knows that she trusts what he prescribes for her, and she knows that he hears her. And so that but it is near family, so at least we can combine family visits whenever we go. But it's unfortunate that I mean, and I even live near a big city, but we have families who are in remote areas. They don't have an option. They have to pack up and go to have these visits to find out some of the answers there. So the first question I was gonna ask was, how was her hearing? So she's hearing all the ranges of the sound.
Yes, she's hearing, but it's something about comprehending. And so I've seen it. Well, I've had a meeting at school. So that was kind of, guys, backing up a little bit. So with my daughter, I've homeschooled her since kindergarten. And I just put her in school this kind of second half of first grade, which was a tough decision. So far, it's been all right. We're taking it one day at a time, but have set up a meeting. So about a month ago, I had a meeting with the principal, the school nurse, the school counselor, and my daughter's teacher, and trying to explain, these are the things I'm seeing. When she brings home her work that she's doing, she just circles every answer. And I said, well, someone correcting you so you know what's right and what's wrong. And she just circles everything. That doesn't really, show that she's been doing that since preschool, where she just circle everything. And so just showing, I'm like, I can tell there's something with comprehension as I've homeschooled her and just asking her questions. Some things, she's smart as an elephant and she gets it. But other things, it's just that she's still struggling with. So, realistically with my daughter, beyond the epilepsy, knowing that she still puts things in her mouth. So I still have to watch her. Just other she has a vocal tick, and each month we kind of rotate between ticks. So it was a vocal tick, then it was cracking her knuckles. Now it's her eye twitching, which could be a seizure, or the motor tick, and we just kind of rotate between them. So it's like in this, kind of going back to your question, it's like we're trying to, for me, I'm just trying to tackle everything at once, but it's hard between, having a dermatologist, a pediatric urologist, a pediatric neurologist, child psychiatrist, regular counseling, and then her getting services, trying to do my best, at school, and then still trying to find a pediatrician that left the practice, and then the pediatric, just everyone, and trying to coordinate these things and get everybody on the same page.
What and coordinating it, you've got the working with insurance with all of them, and then even just copays alone, and then out of pocket on top of that with some of that. I don't know how you do it. That's a lot for one family to be juggling, but it does emphasize why we tell parents all the time, you are the one that has to be there to advocate for your child, because you have all these doctors, and they may retire, you may relocate, but you're the only one as the parent who knows what the school's saying, you know what the doctors are saying, you know what you're seeing at home. No one else sees all of those pieces, and you're there for all those appointments. You're there to kinda help tie it together. So so I kinda wanna unpack a little bit of this. So let's go back to IEP process. Let's talk about that just a little bit. When you How did you start it? Did you go into the school and request that whenever you transferred her into the public school? Or did she go first, and then did they come to you and ask, "Can we start this process?"
Good question. So I have been fighting since preschool. So my daughter went to, in preschool, she went to a private Christian preschool. And the teacher had brought up some things, just saying that my daughter was doing things that just were not what you'd expect. So, like laying on face down on the floor, or just staring, or just all of a sudden start talking while the teacher is talking, just like having these conversations, just things that maybe you wouldn't expect a child to do. And she's like, I feel like maybe there's a delay. And I said, well, can you do testing? And they said, oh, we can't do anything. So they kind of wiped their hands clean of it. And then that's when I did a charter school, but it was virtual school in a way. And I said, "Can you guys do testing?" And they started the process. Within like a year and a half later, nothing became of it. So then that's why I put her in public school. Like, I want to get her tested. And so in that, I try to make it clear ahead of time. This is what my daughter's dealing with. Thankfully, with good school district, a smaller school. So with my daughter's school, there's barely about like 300 kids. Her classroom only has 10 to 13 kids, which
Oh,
is unheard
nice.
of. Yeah, very unheard of,
Yeah.
but everyone's been really nice, very cooperative, but I've made my presence known. So in that, it has been hard to work, when I'm getting a call at least once a week, for my daughter. Like, for example, they did, and they weren't thinking about it, but they said, "Oh, we did hearing testing and vision testing." And they didn't let me know ahead of time, knowing that my daughter freaks out for things like that. And I'm like, okay, I'm coming to pick her up because that's just the end of her day. I'm like, oh, guys, you have to let me know these things. Or, there's one time I felt so bad where I didn't catch it and they didn't catch it. She had a seizure in the classroom. And so she put her head down on the table and the other students were trying to wake her up and they didn't. Like, she didn't wake up right away. And I didn't know until after everything had happened. So, in this kind of with the school, I've had to make my presence known. And so I've been in the office and I told them, I'm like, I've been in the office so much, I should just put a desk in between because
Yeah.
I've dealt with the school nurse and then yeah, trying to get them to give her emergency like medicine, since she has like 2 or 3 different medicines just at the school, and trying to explain this, and they've actually been really helpful. So they've done even referrals to the doctor's office and been in communication with my daughter's like specialist, which I appreciate, and they've helped me get referrals that I couldn't get, which, I'm like, "Thank you, just any help that I can get, I'll take." But at this point, like, I've had that one meeting, with the principal, the school nurse, the counselor, and the teacher, and then we have another, meeting scheduled for the middle of May, but I'm still trying. They're like, "Oh, well, you don't need a 504 plan because we're doing accommodations." I'm like, "I need something." So right now, my next step is to call the school district to see if they can. I want her to just get tested for ADHD. And someone said, call the school district, they have to do it. And so in my case, school is done early June. So time is running out little by little. And so right now I'm just trying to get my foot in the door. But right now, so I'm at that point where I'm still trying to knock on the door. And I feel like someone opens the door, but it keeps getting closed in my face. So I'm like, no, I need that door to be open so we can get someplace. So, we're doing accommodations. I appreciate the meeting, but, still my fear of like, okay, we have school testing coming up in May. The last my daughter had testing, she fell asleep. So I'm like, and she cried through it and she didn't do well on it. So knowing that she's not gonna be able to make it through that. So what is the plan? That she just had her first field trip, which she survived. It was rough, but I let her go because at first I was afraid. And the school nurse went, but at this point I still feel like I have a long ways to go.
Have you talked with her much about her diagnoses and just school? Because because you've gone from homeschooling now into the public school, so that was a shift to begin with, and you had the charter in between. So moving between the 2, have you talked with her much about this yet? And how would you advise to other parents? How much do you share, and how do you share that information with your child?
Good question. So I think you really have to gauge like what your child understands and how much they need to know. With something like epilepsy, I'm really trying to I don't want her to be scared, but I want to be honest too. I'm trying to get her to be more independent, like having her take her medicine. So I won't always prompt her to do it. I'll put it in front of her and she'll take it. And so I'm trying to help her with that. I tell her, I'm like, okay, what you struggle with is you have too much lightning in your brain. And so that's how I kind of explain it to her. And, parents that are listening, yeah, something that's not as scary. Thankfully, she hasn't had like tonic clonic seizures, but she's had absent seizures and trying and then her doctor recently said, well, how many different types of seizures does she have? And I'm like, I don't know, I've noticed at least maybe two. And I get that it can be scary. And for my daughter, sometimes for her seizures are like a popping in the back of her head, so she'll cry because she's like, something popped in the back of my head. Some doctors have said that's a seizure, others said no, that's not a seizure, and I'm like, well, it's something that's making her cry. So in that, it's there and she knows, and there's nothing we can do to prevent it. And after it happens, I can rub the back of her head, but there's nothing I can really give to her, so that's real. And she goes through it. I told her, at school that we don't always have to tell everyone everything. I am cautious, sometimes like when she goes to after school programs, summer camps, at church and the children's ministry, other things, kind of cautious about what we kind of tell people and what we don't, because I don't want people freaking out. Even with family, like I had, family member like, oh, we'll just leave her with family and we'll go to the movies. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to just leave her with family because they don't know the signs and symptoms, and I get just, oh, just go to the movies. I'm like, no, I know that at nighttime, that's when she has seizures. I really work really, really hard to have her not get overly tired because it's one of her triggers. Certain sounds, are difficult for her. So I don't know, like, for example, just flushing the toilet can be a lot for her. So she has her headphones, and sometimes not knowing, okay, I just have them in my purse, so just knowing what'll be too loud for her, what'll be upsetting for her, what's a trigger, what's not, different things. So, in that, just speaking to parents too, don't be afraid to get your children counseling. That was one thing that was a struggle because due to her age, like it was hard finding a counselor, like, oh, she's too young. And so, I was just trying to find someone. Even like I called over 14 people when my daughter was like almost 4.5, 5, about almost 5, right before she turned 5, and no one would see her. And I'm like, well, I want someone to just talk her through this and process everything with her. And I did find a counselor through the charter school, but they're like, oh, she needs long-term counseling. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's the issue. I can't find a long-term counselor. Now I found a counselor and it was good, but then their schedule didn't match up. So then they put us on the waiting list for 3 months. And then we found a new counselor. She was super nice, had one session, and then she left the practice. So now we're back at square one. And sometimes now the counselors are like, oh, we only do virtual. And she just doesn't respond well to virtual, sessions. So she goes to counseling in school, but it's different. She's like, well, we just play games. And she's like, I don't want to talk in front of the other kids. And I get it because you're 6 and you don't want everyone knowing your business in it. So now it's that whole thing to find a counselor that has a schedule that matches up. That's a good fit that just works out in the midst of us trying to move and figure out everything. So, but don't be afraid to just have a counselor just kind of step in, or someone that's not you as the parent. Talk to your child because sometimes they open up more. Like for me, my daughter has this whole thing of, oh, mom, is this normal? And I'm like, I don't like that word normal because how do you measure normal? But in that, trying to say, okay, you having hallucinations, I don't want to say it's not normal. It's technically it's not, but in that, just trying to leave space and say, okay, what did you hear today or what did you see today? It's like, well, I saw the Easter bunny at the airport. Well, I looked, I didn't see the Easter bunny at the airport. She's like, well, I was on the school bus and another kid was biting another kid and he was dressed like a piñata. Likely that wasn't real. But we just have to talk through it, not to alarm her, but saying likely that might have been hallucination. And I said, well, did your friends see it? Or how did your friends respond? And she's like, I got really scared. So just giving her ways to cope because I can't be with her when she's on the bus. I can't always be with her all the time. But in this, I can't really stop what she's seeing, but in it, we're just tracking it and then say, okay, this does happen. This is what you do. And realize you don't have to give into what you hear or what you're seeing. But at the same time, it's scary as a parent because it's like, well, my hands are tied, but I'm just trying to kind of prepare her for it, help her to be independent, but then still try and figure out what's going on.
I've seen a lot in like, on social media and all of parents who they'll start their day with, like, a different mantra with their kids, things like that. You'll see kids on Instagram doing, "I am strong, I am brave." Do you do anything with that like that with your daughter? Have you found anything like that that would help her?
Good question. So I've had to tell myself just personally that I'm capable. And I've had to keep reminding myself of that because sometimes it's overwhelming. Sometimes like the doctor's office will call and like, well, when do you want to schedule? And I'm just like, I can't schedule one more specialist right now. That's going to have to go to the bottom of the list, you know? And so with my daughter, just telling her that, you know, she's still smart, even though she's not like the other students. So it's been interesting. Like with my daughter's class, she has the teacher has paired up with another kid that does like really well, which is good. But then at the same time, I feel like it's easy to compare yourself because she has someone that's her same age that's here helping her with the work. So it has its benefits, but to me at the same time, it has its drawbacks because you're thinking, she's like, well, I'm not smart like her. And that's what she'll tell me. And she's like, well, mom, due to her memory, she was doing something and she forgot where it was, and all the kids laughed at her. And then by the time I got to, you know, my daughter and she's telling about the story, then she was crying and she's like, oh, because I couldn't remember and because I'm not smart and I'm not this. And I had to tell her different kids are better at different things and other things. And, you know, it's hard to tell her, okay, because you have your seizures and your medicine, this all impacts your memory. And sometimes you're just forgetful and clumsy too. So that just kind of, you know, to kind of rolls into my daughter gets hurt a lot. So in that, you know, it's just like having to remind her you're okay, you're special, you know, you're one of a kind. I keep telling her, I'm like, you're going to change the world someday and different things. So I keep reminding her of that. But it's hard when, you know, of course, she sees her other friends. She's like, well, why does my friend get to do this? And why can't I do sleepovers? And why do they remember this? And why can they dress like this?
When you're gonna find too that you're at the stage that it's still hard because there are those huge differences. But she's going to find her tools with that support that she's going to get in the resource room and the specialists that are going to be working with her at school. They're going to be teaching her some of her skills that she needs. She may not do the mental math as quickly, but she's going to learn how to do a tally on the page. She's going to learn how to do something that's going to be her way of keeping track of those numbers so that she can do her version of mental math. And she may end up being faster than the rest of them in 3 years. Right now, though, she's noticing that difference. And I'm with you. Whenever they have peer mentors within the class, when it's the same age, it really is hard. If they get kids that are a year or two older, it doesn't seem the same because they're looking up to them. They're supposed to be smarter than them already, so it kinda helps with that. So and it may be something to kinda put in the back of your mind. A conversation may have to happen sometime asking, "Can we can can we have a teacher's aide in there that's helping her instead of another child so that she's not feeling that way?" The, I think and I haven't met your daughter, but I'm thinking she just needs to be poured into to know how beautiful she is, how smart she is, how and special in a good way, not special as in you're different, special. If you can find the way to make sure that she's hearing that message, which is what I think you were saying, that she was created as a special person, and she has a lot to offer because she has friends. In spite of all these things she's having to face right now, she's making friends at school, and that's nice to hear.
Yes, that's true. And thank you so much for just your kind words. She's my social butterfly.
I'm tired listening to how many different specialists you're already working with, and then on top of how many you've had to switch in such a short time. You're a single mom. When do you work? You're you're running all over the place right now. How are you balancing work and I mean, I know she's in public school now, but you can't totally just let go and walk away. You've gotta be on call all the time with that too, and getting those relay phone calls with all the doctors and therapists and everything. How are you balancing all that?
Yes. So as of last year, it gives me I had like 2 or 3 jobs at once and then started something of my own. So I was a notary and then working multiple jobs and then it was just too much. And then doing something from home and then that became a little too much too. As of recently, so I'm a registered behavior technician. So I'm working with kiddos that have special needs and doing that part time. But as you know, that still a lot of times doesn't pay the bills. It's like it's for as much work that we do. Like I love the kids and we feed them, we're potty training them, trying to keep them from eloping and keeping them alive and teaching them all these things. And it's rewarding. But at the same time, trying to check my phone while trying to check on them, make sure they're not choking and taking them to the restroom restroom and potty accidents and other things. So honestly, I'm taking it one day at a time. I don't get child support. I don't get alimony. So for those who are like, oh, I'm sure she gets something on the side, I have in the process of starting something else for myself. So becoming a life coach, which has been an exciting journey. It has not, I'm still in that first kind of year, so don't have that income coming in. But little by little, I'm like, I know that it's going to come. So it's providing with that flexibility. But right now, just having to kind of work part time while I can. And then I do inspections. To make sure things, and I've worked with a company doing field inspections. So that's kind of nice because it's like, okay, I do an inspection per hour and it helps out, but it has been hard trying to find something that's work from home, but that pays. Like I've done things like in the field, but that's just as hard trying to kind of get back and forth between my daughter's school. Like, as I stated, like for me, a lot of times I get a call at least once a week, that something's going on, or they say, oh, you didn't sign this paper, or, oh, the school nurse calls and she's like, oh, I need this. And then they're like, oh, you missed his signature. And then trying to email my daughter's teacher and say, okay, where's her homework? And she's lost 5 jackets and all these different things. And, I'm going to pick her up at one gate. And my daughter's at the back gate. And she's like, you forgot about me. And she's freaking out, all these different things. I'm like, okay, can she wear her sensory necklace in the class versus not wearing it? And is she still, because my daughter, since she puts things in her mouth, she'll eat holes through her t-shirt. So it's all these different things, that we're dealing with at the moment. I'm like, okay, make sure she's not putting things in her mouth, in the classroom because she does it at home. So I'm kind of going back to your question. I still work because I have to eat. But at this time, that's kind of the challenge I'm facing, is to move closer to family to really have more support. But that means moving out of state, but then also being a caregiver to family. So going from taking care of just my daughter, where I am, to now taking care of my daughter, my mom, and my grandmother, which, would be interesting. It's just me, once again, taking care of 3 people, but then I get family support, or moving to another state that's cheaper but having no support, which I've done before and I made it work, or staying where I am and being close to my dad's father. But in this, he's not really kind of believing it. So that's a kind of another piece, is that it's one thing when you're co-parenting, but when you're co-parenting with someone that doesn't like believe that your child has something going on, or really doesn't see it because he's not the one, at the doctor's appointments and speaking to the specialist. It's just me. So at this time, he's like, well, she doesn't need medicine. We just need to love her more. And I'm like, no, she can die from this, So for those that are going through it, I get that it's hard when you're just trying to really convince people. It's hard enough to convince school what's going on, but then to have to convince family too is just as hard.
But a lot of times I know the extended family are hard, but you're talking about more your immediate family. That's even more that you're having to carry with that.
Exactly. They're just like, oh, well, she, the whole thing, they say, oh, if the child doesn't eat, they'll just, I said, oh, give my daughter something to eat. And like, oh, she doesn't eat, she'll eat it eventually. And I'm like, no, you don't get, a lot of times the kids that have special needs, if you put something in front of them, they just won't eat. And then we just have this whole other slew of issues, so it's just like trying to get people to really understand. They're like, oh no, just leave it there. She'll eat it eventually. Like, no, that plate's been here for 2 days, so
Well, you mentioned that you're starting to work as a certified life coach.
yes.
Do you have any specific advice or tools that you found helpful that you wanna pass on about raising children with special needs?
Yes, a lot of different things. So, just really being kind to yourself. So, my niche is a little bit different. So, I work with women that are struggling due to infertility, miscarriage, and also single moms by choice. So, moms that are deciding to adopt and foster. And so, for me, I've been in all 3 seasons. When I speak to women that, especially starting their family on their own, realizing that things are not going to always turn out as you plan them to, but realize that you can do this, because I know a lot of women that are going into it, or that are single parents, and they're just like, oh, how am I going to do this when I do about childcare? I don't have support. And I'm like, you know what? You're going to find a way to make it work. You're going to find community. You're going to find, like for me, support groups, even Facebook groups just help. Like sometimes I don't even respond, but I'll just like heart emoji or that care emoji or whatever it is, just to have that connection. But it's, other people where, they have teenagers that have special needs. And I'm like, that's going to be me someday, and saying, okay, their child can't get a job, or they can't drive, or, sometimes up at 3 in the morning, and say, okay, are people going to be kind to my daughter? And many parents, I'm sure that's what they're going through. For me, I watch my daughter sleep too, just to make sure she's okay. But just thinking, okay, there are those days, how am I going to do this? How are we going to make this work? But for parents that are going through it, just realize that when you feel like all your strength has been depleted, depleted, like somehow this reservoir of just kind of strength will come and it'll find you. And you're like, well, how am I going to keep going? But it's that whole thing of like, I'm capable, I'm enough. It's a lot right now. Sometimes you do have to step back. Sometimes people are not going to get it. Sometimes your job's not going to understand, as I say, but sometimes family's not going to understand. Sometimes things are going to be tight financially. Sometimes you're just going to have those, moments where you just have to say, okay, just breathe. A lot of times I just have to just breathe. And
Tell my listeners how they can work with you if they want to connect with you.
yes, I'm always here. So for me, it's something I'm passionate about, just encouraging others and loving on others. And just if I get free hugs all day, I'm like, that would be just great. For me, I just know how it is when you just feel isolated. The name of my business is Fresh Start Life Coaching LLC. And my email is fslcpodcast@gmail.com. I do offer initial consultation, but even beyond that, if you just want to talk or just get guidance on like, saying, okay, I'm thinking about putting my child in school or I'm thinking about homeschooling my child, what do I do next? I can speak to both of those. You say, how do I contact the specialist or how do I get my voice heard? I can help you with that. If you're just trying to come up with a list of questions, I can assist with that. If you're dealing with just co-parenting, that's a whole nother thing. Or just if you're in something that's toxic, I've told people, don't stay in a toxic relationship or toxic marriage just because you're like, well, I don't know how I'm going to raise this child on my own. And, different things like that. As like rates of child abuse and even domestic violence are high, for families that do have, at least one child that has special needs. It makes sense in the midst of all the stress and the wear and tear. So, I'm here to listen.
We'll put your contacts in the show notes too, so that if anyone wants to reach out, they can find you. And so that's probably the best way to do it there. So switching gears a little bit here, I've been this season I've been having my guest repeat a statement that I read and then finish it as a way of giving advice to our listeners. And we'll use this listeners, you may see these show up as different clips here and there on social media. But it's to me it's kind of a fun way to kind of wrap up everything and pass on some final words of advice. So the first one, the biggest challenge I faced in raising my daughter with special needs is.
Okay, yes, the biggest challenge I face in raising my daughter with special needs is just that guilt and feel like I'm not enough. So those two, so really having to release the guilt. As I say, my daughter was at school and had a seizure in the classroom and saying, I should have been there. I'm a bad mom. I should have stuck with homeschooling and just feeling like I'm not enough and trying to be, in all these places saying, okay, well, sometimes when it comes to specialist appointments, I can only do so many appointments at once. And sometimes I'm like, well, I should have been able to schedule 5 specialist appointments. Why not? But just saying, no, she can only handle so much. I can only handle so much. But, in that, it's just really having to be kind to myself, releasing the guilt, and just realizing that I'm doing the best that I can with what I've been handed.
All right, let's try number 2 here. So we have one thing I wish I knew starting out as a single parent of a child with special needs is.
One thing that I wish I knew is that the importance of just standing up for my daughter, like advocating for her. Like a lot of times I just kind of thought, oh, okay, well, the doctor's going to do the referral, so I don't have to follow up. Oh, the school's going to just, send her for testing and I don't have to stay on them. Oh, family's just going to understand. They're going to get that I can't do this or I have to say no to this. And yet, in all of these arenas, realizing that a lot of times people just kind of do the bare minimum, it feels like these days. And so, in this one thing that I wish I knew was just advocating for her earlier.
You're doing a good job with that. One thing that, I didn't, because it was early in my walk, I didn't understand back when my daughter was in preschool, but I would pick her up every day from preschool and kindergarten and have her screaming to the car because she was utterly exhausted. She had used every ounce of her energy just to visually keep track of where her teacher was, where her friends were, where the toy was, and sorting through all those bright colors in the room. And so you've already learned how to use those words to pinpoint not, "Can I please have this?" but, "This is what my daughter needs. This is why she needs it. This is what we need to do." It's non-negotiable. You've already put it out there. I didn't have that skill, so I commend you on that. But parents listening, listen to that pattern. It's not gonna be the same for your child, but if you can identify the what, the why, and what the solution is, you've already won the battle. because now you've been able to lay it out so that you know that you're able to advocate for your child very effectively if you can state it that way. Because now you're not trying to ask permission for something. You're coming in at a point of strength and saying, I'm here, I'm helping my child. This is what we need to do, and this is why. And not many are gonna argue with you on that one. So the very good example there of how to do it, and I appreciate the way that you worded that. Okay, so this is the longest one. So the most important thing I've learned about myself through this journey of raising a child with special needs is.
For me, would just be this inner strength. Like just realizing, I know people say it's cliche, but they say, oh, you don't know how strong you are until you have to like go through something. For me, I'm just like learned the strength that I didn't have a choice, either be strong or not. Like I've got to be strong for her because I'm like all she has. So
Alright, so I have 2 more, these are shorter now. My hope for other parents raising children with special needs is.
my hope is that you still are able to just show them that love and be that kindness that likely that they might not always see in the world. So that's just my hope, that you're still able to love them and show them that they have value.
Alright, so final one, this is the easy one for you, I think. Self-care for me as a single parent looks like.
Self-care for me, sometimes it's just taking a nap. Sometimes they're not intentional. I'm on the couch and I'm like, "Oh, no, I fell asleep." But in that, it's just like, with my daughter, she goes to school, and so sometimes she's at the after-school program, and I was a little leery. Sometimes it has its ups and its downs, but sometimes she's like, "Mom, I wanna stay later." And I was trying to pick her up right after school, but I'm like, "Well, it's there, so why not use it?" So sometimes self-care is letting her stay maybe an hour and picking her up and maybe just watching a movie, maybe just eating a meal. Like I went to Walmart today and just walked around and I'm like, okay, it was nice to not have someone ask me for a toy. Self care, sometimes it's like, okay, letting her dad take her an extra day. Sometimes like I feel a little guilty, but it's kind of nice because then I can get things done or work a little, work extra or plan something fun for us or different things like that. So, I try not to go overboard, but sometimes it's just giving myself that hour to just eat a meal and sit down, or just like maybe not scheduling appointments for her for a week and say we can schedule them next week. Or, even like recently I was sick while my daughter was sick and I took myself to urgent care and I said, Danielle, you took care of yourself. And I'm like, I was kind of like dying in it, and everything. But I'm like, okay, why is it you can take your daughter to her 5 appointments, but you can't even take yourself to urgent care? Why do you
Right.
feel bad about that? And so really having to sit down and do that. Maybe it's just getting my hair done for an hour. I don't do anything expensive once again, but sometimes it's just little things like that, or just going to the bookstore and walking around.
Well, thank you for spending the time today to go through this. You've given us some really good information, a lot to think about, and I know parents that are listening at different stages are going to pull information from this. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, thank you for just having me and for letting me be here. And just thank you for those that are listening. I know you could be doing lots of other things, but I just hope that something that was said just encourages you, gives you that strength, and lets you know that it's not all in your head. Because sometimes people just say, oh, you're just, your kid's just sensitive, or they're just growing up, or they need to toughen up. And you're like, no, there's something seriously wrong, genuinely wrong. So just know that it's not just all in your head. You're the parent and you notice the little things. So, be in tune with that and listen to it and act upon it.
Thanks again to Danielle for sharing her story and invaluable advice. As Danielle mentioned, there are so many resources available to help parents on this journey. If you're looking for a supportive community and even more insights on raising a child with special needs, head over to waterprairie.com/newsletter to sign up for the Water Prairie newsletter. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week when we'll learn how an OT is using no writing to teach kids writing.